Oh yeah, looking good.
I promise I'm going to get back to talking about anime any minute now, but today I wanted to talk about this book. It might be weird seeing me talk about, like, Islam and stuff. I don't really talk about it too much, just because I'm not a sheikh and I'm not really here to, like, lecture anybody. Because today, like, I'm talking about an Islamic book, but I'm not really, passing any judgments from an Islamic perspective. I guess to an extent I am going to be making some Islamic judgments, but not anything too crazy. Religion is just a topic that understandably makes a lot of people angry. And I don't want to get too deep into it. I'm not trying to become a religious figure. I am not an expert on Islamic matters. I am an enthusiast. I am a layman who just loves to read books about Islam, Islamic history, Islamic jurisprudence, theology. I do consider myself something of an expert on the English language and on literature and books and stuff. I might not be the foremost, I don't have an MFA, I don't have a PhD, but the degree that I do have requires me to be good at English. My main criticism with this book is a structural criticism. It's a kind of criticism that if you watch my main channel, you've heard me make a million times for works of fiction, or like comic books and TV shows and stuff. But today I'm applying it to a non-fiction book that is trying to teach us something about Islam, and I think it completely fails. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it is a pretty popular book these days. I'm not, punching down at some, lesser known work of Aqidah or whatever. I want to start off just by saying I don't disagree with the message of the book. The message of the book is the best part. I think it's a message that we could really use in the modern day. Most of what I find that Islam has become, like at least discussions about Islam, online, a lot of it comes down to judgment that has its roots in kibriya, pridefulness. There's not really any open-mindedness or husn al-dhann, benefit of the doubt, and there's not really like an attempt to impart knowledge. The idea of, a born Muslim or someone who's familiar with Islam sort of rediscovering Islam through a different lens, a lens that we kind of forgot about. The idea of, focusing on the mercy and love aspect is kind of a forgotten aspect in a lot of ways, or at least the way a lot of modern sheikhs will discuss mercy and love, and a lot of prominent speakers. Because we talk about sheikhs, a lot of the most popular Muslims in the modern day are not even sheikhs. They don't have ijazas at all. They're basically just talking heads. They're good at talking, but they're not really experts in any particular way.
They're influencers. The word I'm looking for is influencers.
The reason I want to criticize this book is mainly because I think that when you have a good message, but the message is executed badly, I think it does the message a disservice. It's not just that you did not do enough service to the message, it's that you did the message a disservice. It devalues the message when the execution is bad. A lot of people did benefit from this book, but I don't think a lot of these people realize that they could have gotten the same benefit from a book that was like 50 pages long instead of like 400. Let me get into the first major problem, because there's two major problems that I was able to identify that made me feel like I was not reading something of great value, but I was reading some great value. You know what I'm saying? I'm reading a great value version of an Islamic book. The first is the repetitive sentence structure. This book came out before the proliferation of AI, which is very impressive because it feels like it was written entirely by AI. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if AI was exclusively trained on this book. You will lose count of how many times you read the sentence, "It's not just X, it's Y." Just look at this triple whammy we have right here. The Quran does not just lead us, it liberates us from the grips of the ego. It does not just guide us, it helps us grow past the shells of our limiting beliefs. It does not just confront us, it consoles us with God's infinite mercy. Bro, be so for real with me right now. Did we really need 3 sentences to convey that message? A bunch of these are like the exact same thing. It does not just guide us, it helps us grow past ourselves. That's like a kind of guiding. You just described like a way of guiding. That's a guiding. It's not just this paragraph. This is one that I just found, like, I did not count the amount of times that I read this sentence structure. I just took note of the times when it stood out to me glaringly. And on the exact same page as the last passage that I read, she says, "The Quran is not meant to only be recited. It is meant to be taken in like the fragrance of a rose, deep within our essence, allowing it to permeate in the deepest recesses of our being." Again, like we're doing this again. It's not meant only to be recited, it's also meant to be understood. We'll get into the metaphors, but The Quran not only reminds us of the human being's divinely inspired potential, but helps us to course correct towards actualizing that potential. Wow, really? Thanks for that. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but those two sound like the exact same thing. We are called not to just read the Quran, but to become a manifestation of its message. I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, when you read the Quran, it tells you to do things. I'm agreeing with every sentence she's saying. I'm just saying, like, the way she's, like, choosing to put this over and over and over and over and over again, it becomes a problem. You feel like you're reading the same sentence every page. It's like 10 of the same sentence in a row. Islam is not only a religion. It's a way of life that can physically, mentally, and spiritually transform a believer. That's a religion. That's what a religion is. If a religion isn't a way of life, then what is it exactly? God did not send the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to begin a new religion. Rather, he sent him to reignite our relationship with the divine. This is correct. But like right after a sentence where you had the same exact structure, now it's starting to sort of in one ear out the other. Or I guess like in one, whatever, However, the Quran does not just speak to our relationship with God. It also guides and counsels us in our relationship with all that God created. That's true. And I agree. But now we're on the third sentence in a row where you're using that same structure and it's not sticking. Like, I feel like if you were just more of a creative writer, I guess, like you could figure out new ways to convey this information. I feel like it's taking brain power and the brain power is not being replaced by knowledge.
Islam is not a path about obtaining God's love. It is a path that teaches you to strive, persevere, and unveil what you have already been given. Islam is not just a series of practices and actions. It is a light that helps grow the seeds of our most authentic selves. Islam is not
Red alert! We are about to break the record!
It is not only about celebrating what is right and standing up against what is wrong, but bringing mercy and excellence to our words, thoughts, actions, and deeds. Why?
Challenge to anyone watching this. Take that section and put it in 1 or 2 sentences, and it'll probably be better. I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but if the goal is to convey an important message, you need to convey it in a way where the message is going to stick in someone's mind. Doing these unnecessary linguistic flourishes, like as if you're trying to be Ocean Vuong or something, like this is not the book for that, It's not that you can't use beautiful language to describe these very beautiful concepts, but you're not using beautiful language to describe very beautiful concepts. You're using the same repetitive language to describe concepts that should be beautiful, and you're turning them into something mundane. And something is lost. Something very important is lost when we're, discussing something very important, and we're using very inadequate language to describe it. At several points during reading this book, you will snap out of a trance, and you'll realize you read the same line like 10 times in a row, and you go back and you realize, wait, I haven't been paying attention for this entire page. Let me go back and read from the beginning. And then you lose your train of thought as soon as you get to that same spot, because it's like, it just keeps beating you over the head with the same words over and over again. And, I feel like I'm not learning anything new about any of these concepts, man. Like I came here to learn, but I'm not learning. I guess I am learning about like how to write an Islamic book and how not to write it. I understand that, from reading the introduction, the author grew up as a Muslim and then over time rediscovered what Islam meant to her. And I understand that the sentence structure specifically, it's not just X, it's Y. That sentence structure is basically the theme of the whole book. It's about rediscovering Islam for people who think that they are already familiar with Islam. It's about rediscovering things that they might have forgotten or that they were unfortunately never taught about with Islam. And so the whole book is kind of it's not just X, it's Y. Prayer is not just this, it's also this. Istighfar is not just this, it's also this. The Quran is not just this, it's also this. And you kind of do have to, like when you are unlearning people so that they can relearn, you're pouring out the bad water so you can reintroduce the good water into the cup, to use a metaphor of my own. We're going to get to the metaphor. We're going to get into the metaphor. But I understand that the whole book is basically that. See, if it was just the repetitive sentence structure, I would have not even made this video. I would have ignored this. I might have, taken a picture of a page and posted it on Twitter or something, or IG stories or whatever. And I would have been like, hey, look at this funny way of wording something, look how repetitive this book is. Like, oh my God, See if you can tell me what's wrong with this paragraph. The Quran is like a spiritual iron that straightens the creases of our spirit through its powerful transmission. The revelation has a mysterious way of decoding and recoding our spiritual mainframe from the emotional traumas and patterns of the past. God's words are a source of medicine for the broken heart seeking to be whole again, truth for the confused heart seeking clarity and certainty, and guidance for the lost and straying hearts seeking to be found. 3 metaphors, really? In the same paragraph? You're spoiling us.
Actually, technically, it's 5 metaphors. The last 2 just didn't even register with me.
So, is the Quran an iron? Or is it a computer programmer? Or is it medicine? Because you already sold me on the Quran being an iron. I mean, it's kind of a heavy-handed metaphor. I mean, do you need to tell us that it straightens the creases of our spirit through its powerful transmission? I think the powerful transmission is implied by the fact that it straightens out the creases, but let me not get too deep into that part, because if I have to take apart every metaphor, that's crazy. But you already gave me the image of the Quran as an iron. And then you tell me that it is some kind of sentient computer programmer, which, I mean, the Quran being a sentient thing is something that is often discussed in Islamic circles, but that's beside the point. So now I have 2 competing images in my mind, and they're both sort of wrestling for my attention. And then in the same exact paragraph, you give me a 3rd metaphor comparing the Quran to medicine. And now I have 3 competing images in my head, and I'm totally, completely lost. On one hand, you can dwell on each metaphor and then move on to the next one. I think that might be a better way of doing this. Or you can stick to one of them, because I'm not getting new information or new valuable insights or new ways of thinking about the Quran from all these metaphors. I'm just getting confused. Metaphors are supposed to be easy to digest. They're supposed to make you think about something in a new way, or offer a sort of new angle or lens of looking at something that gives you more insight into the way it is, or just position something in a way that gives you a sort of aha moment. You're like, oh, wow, yeah, it kind of is like that, huh? When you throw as many of them as you can into the same mixture, it does not help your point at all. You didn't care enough to elaborate on any of the metaphors. You were just so excited to get to the next metaphor that you left me hanging over here, and now it's up to me to pick up the pieces. Metaphor salads don't work like this, dude. This is a very amateur problem. This is the kind of thing that you see in a middle schooler's essay or something like that. If I go back to the stuff that I wrote in high school, even in early college, I'll admit, I was not always a great writer. I still am not really a great writer. But these are problems that you kind of just get filtered out just by reading books, by reading a lot of English literature. You can sort of purge these are bad habits out of your writing. And that's why, I'm telling I'm not saying that the points that she's making are bad, but if the way you make your point is bad, then is the point still even that good? I'm saying this as a guy who thinks that this book has a good message, but such a lack of concern for the conveying of that message means the message sort of disintegrates on the way there. And at that point, a lot of people will say the medium is the message. If you are not conveying the message properly, then the message that arrives at the recipient is not going to be the message that you intended. But maybe she intended it to be this disjointed, so I don't know. And then sometimes we have a problem where a metaphor is elaborated on, but then later is completely abandoned, and you're just left out there to dry. For example, we have at some point this metaphor where she explains the relationship between the body, the ego, and the spirit. And she says that the body is wet clay, the spirit is the brilliant sun, and the ego is the steam that comes off of the wet clay when the heat from the sun sort of, hits the wet clay. It makes steam. And then the steam obscures the sun from the wet clay. It's kind of a complicated metaphor, it's got a lot of moving parts to it, but it is a genuinely interesting and I think useful metaphor for understanding this framing device of ego, soul, and spirit. In that sense, we can visualize the ego as something that naturally arises out of the relationship between the spirit and the body, so long as there is such a thing as the spirit, the brilliant light, and the body, this thing that is a vessel for the spirit, then naturally something like an ego has to arise to obscure the spirit from the body. That's I guess the point that the metaphor is driving home. And then this is what I mean by elaborating is you let the audience, the reader or whatever, the recipient of the message sit with the metaphor for a while. And they start to really contemplate it and, arrive at their own conclusions. Several pages later, A. Helwa, the author, says this: It is only when the sun of the ego sets that the true everlasting light of the soul and the innate beauty within the human being can rise. But I thought the spirit was the sun. I'm getting scammed, dude. The sheer abundance of metaphors means that if you have the misfortune of remembering even one metaphor, you will be punished for it later on, because she's going to introduce another metaphor that's sort of... Like, dude, I'm not being rewarded for remembering what you say. I'm being punished. So now I have even less reason to be attentive to your book. Now, this book takes a lot from Sufi teachings, and I don't have a strong opinion on Sufism. A lot of people really love it. A lot of people really hate it. I think it's useful. I think it, but this isn't about my opinions on Tasawwuf. The fact is, Sufis love their metaphors. They love their metaphors. They can't get enough of them. And there's so many turuq and so many sheikhs and murshids and murids and all these guys who keep using their own metaphors and stuff. And if you were to read a book by a single Sufi master, then you would find consistency. If you read, for example, books by Sayyid Hussein Nasr, he doesn't really confuse you by throwing so many metaphors at you. He tries to elaborate on the metaphor, and he tries to let it sink in. And I find that, like when you read, his work, really the work of any, important Sufi figure, they really let the metaphor sink in so that you can contemplate it before moving on to the next one. And, you often feel rewarded if you contemplate a metaphor long enough and you arrive at, some new information or knowledge or, insight. If you were to just take every metaphor used by every Sufi in history and just put them all into one book, it would be a mess. You would arrive at nothing. There's a reason they are different turuq, different paths, different brotherhoods, different, angles of approaching God. It's not that you can't learn from all of them, but rather that if you want to, really benefit from the knowledge, you got to stick to one before you move on to the next. You really got to understand the first one, the first path, the first metaphor, the first this and that, and then move on to the next one. But this book feels like it's just like, this author, A. Helwa, is very excited to share all these metaphors with us, and in her eagerness, in her enthusiasm, she loses us completely, or at least she loses me. Historically, most of the Islamic scholars, if you were to read any of their works, they try to keep things concise. And I understand that sounds ironic, given the fact that these guys write often like 30-volume level, tafsirs of the Quran, and, they have so many books of fatawa and everything, but they do try to keep things concise, especially when it comes to matters of aqeedah, matters of like introductory, treatises. A lot of the stuff that these guys write are just treatises. They are very small, like just a handful of pages, like a manifesto, like a little thing. And oftentimes, these sheikhs are so eloquent in the Arabic language, they have this level of balagha, that they can basically make a poem out of it. Like, for example, if you read Bad al-Amali by Siraj al-Din al-Ushi, or Al-Kharid al-Bahiyya by Ahmad al-Dardir. These are poems, and they are theological treatises. They teach you a thing or two about theology, about, what mainstream Sunni Islam is from the Ash'ari Maturidi point of view, not really from the Athari point of view, but the Atharis have their own, treatises. Like, these treatises are concise. They are meant to be very concise, and they are so eloquent in their language that they can even make it into a catchy poem that is easy to memorize. And when it's so much thought and effort goes into making this as accessible to a beginner as possible, instead of overwhelming them with so many ideas and metaphors. They just let you, sit in the most simple ideas possible. And when you're sitting in it, it's very pleasant because it's got a, catchy rhythm, and it's very pleasant to read, and you finish it very quickly, and you find that there are bits and pieces stuck in your mind, and you contemplate them. And it's sort of the opposite with Secrets of Divine Love. Now, this isn't to say that sheikhs could not become repetitive. Like, they could often be repetitive, but in my experiences reading the books of these great sheikhs, when they're repetitive, it's usually to drive a point home. There's usually some hikmah, some wisdom, in the sense of like, I am repeating this again so that you understand it with this sentence. You've understood this sentence with this sentence, but now understand it with that sentence. And it's like, I understand, like, you kind of get the benefit of it, and you understand why, and it's like, you get kind of grateful for them repeating something so you don't get lost. Here, there isn't even the opportunity to get lost. In this book, you don't have the opportunity to get lost because, we don't move. We don't move from the starting point. She just takes you in circles around the starting point, And, at this point, I'm like, dude, I know, I get it, bro. Please, like, Irhamni yani, come on. If I had to pinpoint the reason that I think this book fails so spectacularly, I would say it's because rather than trying to word these very important points as concisely as possible, it feels like she's just trying to make aspirational mood board quotes. Which is fine, but for every sentence an aspirational mood board quote is too much. You're drowning the food in butter. You only needed this much butter. And you put 3 sticks in. No one's gonna eat that, dude. We're getting sick. Now, if it was just the repetitive sentence structure and the overuse of metaphors, I wouldn't have made this video still. But then I went on her website. If you go to her website, you'll see that she's offering a course for fans of the book. Now that's cool. I'm not sure that this book needs a course, but on the other hand, maybe it does need a course to sort of parse the incoherence. $400. It costs $400 for 13 hours of content. I have never in my life seen Islamic studies advertised as content. The way this is written makes it feel like you're paying $400 to watch 13 hours of vlogs by author Helwa. But, let's take a deeper look. Maybe it's worth the money. I mean, let's take a look. Well, what does the course offer? Heart-opening Quran verses. You can read the Quran completely for free on the internet. There's no copyright on it. Prophetic prayers. You can find those for free online. Inspiring hadiths. You can read every single hadith in the world for free online. There's so many books, whether you want Sunni hadiths, Shia hadiths, it does not matter. You can find them all for free. Spiritual teaching stories. I don't know what that means, but you can find a lot of free Islamic spiritual teachings online. Like, you don't have to pay $400 for that. Poetry and prose from the great Sufi masters. Yep, all public domain, all free. What about the modules? Maybe the modules will have more information and we can really get to the core of why this costs $400. So module 1 is entirely about the author. Module 2 is about the book that you already read, but that's fine. Module 3 is vibes. $400 for vibes. If you go on YouTube, you can find so many playlists of so many sheikhs going over and giving you a full rundown, full explanation of some of the most intense and difficult, and also some of the best introductory works in Islamic history.
And also all these people have ijazas, so they are accredited and authorized to teach the subjects that they are teaching.
And the whole idea is that, if you are a religious person, I'm not saying I'm a religious person, I'm just saying if you are a religious person, then you acknowledge that religious guidance is more important than material worldly guidance. You acknowledge that, this is very important stuff that needs to be spread no matter the cost. Like if you're teaching engineering, okay, you can charge whatever you want, but when you're teaching religion, this is something that has much greater weight. So you should be trying to spread it to as many people as possible, because that is the benefit in and of itself, right?
But let's take the conversation away from religion for a second. Like, if you just go on YouTube, and there's also like free education websites and stuff for Islam and all kinds of things, but just go on YouTube, you can learn about anything that you want for free because, these professors or these universities are offering these courses online for free. You can learn about philosophy, literature. You got literature over here. You got poetry by Rifat al-Ara'ir, rest in peace. He was murdered by Israel. You can learn about poetry, physics. You can learn there's so many people who just want other people to benefit from their knowledge. So many educators who just want to impart their knowledge on a wider audience, whoever's interested. So to charge $400 for vibes and to frame it as education is just absurd because these people are not even necessarily Muslims. They can be, but they're not even teaching Islam here. They're teaching something that is not religious, and yet they are not charging anything. And obviously the university, the institution that they're teaching at, has a say in whether this goes to be free or not. And obviously it's not the exact same as sitting in a class, but just the joy of giving information to people, the joy of spreading education and knowledge. That's the whole point. That's what makes this whole $400 course feel so egregious to me, is Dude, I thought the whole point was just to teach Islam. Why are we doing this now?
This graphic just tells you everything you need to know about this course. To take a page out of author Helwa's book, this isn't about Islamic guidance. This is a lifestyle brand.
And I would like to add an insight that I arrived at in post, which is that the book in this image is positioned as an accessory to be posed with or posted on social media alongside all your other material accessories, your earrings, your sunglasses, your candles, your perfume, your lipstick. It's an accessory. It's not actually meant to be read and contemplated like an Islamic text. It's meant to be a signifier of values that you supposedly possess. And the values that this book and this whole project represent do not actually contradict that much with materialism, which is directly at odds with Islam as a whole.